I was 8 months pregnant when I found out my husband wasn't late at work. He was in a hotel room across town with the woman who had been checking my baby's heartbeat. The night I went into labor, he didn't hold my hand. He held hers. My name is Emma, and I'm 79 years old now. For a long time, I was ashamed to tell this story. But today, I share it because someone out there might need to hear it. Before I begin, if stories of strength and second chances touch your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps these real stories reach women who feel alone. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. Back then, I was just 22, living in a quiet Ohio town where everyone knew your business before you did. I worked at a small diner on Main Street. That's where I met Thomas. He was charming in that easy, confident way that makes a young girl feel chosen. He talked about big dreams, about moving to Chicago one day, about building a life that wasn't ordinary. When he asked me out, I felt like my life had finally started. We married quickly after I found out I was pregnant. In those days, being unmarried and expecting was something people whispered about in church parking lots. Thomas insisted it was fine. "We'll make it work," he said, kissing my forehead like he meant it. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. When it came time for prenatal care, our family doctor referred me to a new obstetrician who had just opened a clinic in town. She was polished, educated, confident. Everything I wasn't. Thomas suddenly became very interested in attending every appointment. He asked questions about vitamins, ultrasounds, delivery plans. I thought he was being supportive. I told my friends how lucky I was. But small things started to bother me. The way she laughed at his jokes. The way he lingered after appointments while I was told to change behind a curtain. The way his cologne changed. The late-night business meetings. I told myself pregnancy was making me insecure. The truth found me instead. One evening, while folding laundry, a receipt slipped from his jacket pocket. It wasn't from the hardware store. It was from a hotel. And written on the back in neat handwriting were the words, "I can't wait until it's just us." My heart knew before my mind did. I confronted him. He denied everything. Said I was hormonal. Said I was imagining things. I cried myself to sleep that night, feeling foolish for even asking. 3 weeks later, my water broke during a thunderstorm. And that was the night everything shattered. The contractions started just after midnight. Rain hit the windows so hard it sounded like the sky was breaking apart. Thomas drove me to the hospital in silence, his fingers tapping nervously against the steering wheel. I remember thinking he looked more anxious than excited. Not like a first-time father. Like a man waiting for something else to happen. When we arrived, she was already there. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. Calm smile. She said it was coincidence, that she had been finishing paperwork. I believed her because I needed to. Labor lasted 14 long hours. 14 hours of pain, of fear, of begging for reassurance. Every time I reached for Thomas, he seemed distracted. Every time she left the room, he found a reason to step out too. At one point, during a particularly brutal contraction, I noticed both of them were gone. I asked the nurse where my husband was. She avoided my eyes. "He'll be back," she said softly. There was pity in her voice. That's when something inside me turned cold. When they returned, her lipstick was smudged. Thomas wouldn't look at me. I delivered my son alone. He was perfect. Tiny but strong, with a cry that filled the room like it was claiming space in the world. I held him against my chest and told him I would always protect him. I didn't know yet how soon that promise would be tested. I lost a lot of blood after delivery. I remember drifting in and out, hearing whispers I couldn't fully understand. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Thomas standing too close to her, their heads bent together. When I woke up hours later, the room was quiet. Too quiet. My baby was in a bassinet beside me. But Thomas was gone. On the tray table was an envelope with my name written in his handwriting. My hands shook so badly I could barely open it. "Emma, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I didn't mean for things to happen this way, but I can't ignore what I feel. I'm leaving with her. This is best for everyone. Best for everyone." I stared at those words until they blurred. I had just given birth to his child. I had almost died. And he called it best. A nurse came in and saw my face. She didn't say much, just squeezed my shoulder. Some men don't know what they're throwing away, she whispered. I was 22 years old, bleeding, exhausted, holding a newborn in my arms, and completely alone. That night, I named my son Noah. Strong. Survivor. I didn't know how we would manage. I didn't know where we would live. I only knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would never let him feel unwanted. When I left the hospital 3 days later, there were no balloons. No proud father. Just me, a diaper bag, and a heart that felt cracked wide open. But what I found waiting at the house hurt even more than the letter. When I got home, the front door key didn't work. I stood there on the porch with Noah in my arms, still sore from stitches, still weak from blood loss, trying the key again and again like maybe I was just too tired to turn it right. But the lock had been changed. Through the window, I could see that half the furniture was gone. Before I could even knock, Thomas's mother opened the door. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked prepared. He thought this would be easier, she said flatly, handing me a small envelope. There's money inside. Enough for a few months. You can stay at the apartment on Cedar Street. It's already paid. I stared at her. Where is he? Gone. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just gone. I didn't cry in front of her. I adjusted Noah against my chest and walked back down those porch steps with my dignity hanging on by a thread. If I cried, I would break. And I couldn't break. I had a baby who depended on me. The apartment on Cedar Street was small and smelled like old carpet. 1 bedroom. A tiny kitchen. My clothes were stacked in boxes by the wall. None of our wedding photos. None of the gifts we had received. It was like our marriage had been erased. That first night, I sat on the edge of the bed with Noah sleeping beside me in a borrowed bassinet. I looked at his tiny fingers curled into fists and made a promise. I would not go back to my parents in shame. I would not beg Thomas to return. I would not let this be the story that defined us. The money he left covered 3 months of rent and groceries. After that, I would be on my own. I had no degree. No savings. Just a high school diploma and a willingness to work until my hands ached. So that's exactly what I did. I started baking again. Before marriage, I used to sell homemade pies and cakes at church fundraisers. I put up a small handwritten sign at the grocery store bulletin board: fresh baked goods, affordable, call Emma. The first week, I got 2 orders. The second week, 5. I baked with Noah in a carrier strapped to my chest, rocking him gently with my body while stirring batter. Some nights I slept 3 hours. Some mornings I woke up terrified about bills. But every time I looked at my son, something stronger than fear rose up inside me. People in town whispered. They always do. I heard them in the bakery aisle. That's the girl whose husband ran off with the doctor. I kept my head high. Let them talk. What they didn't know is that every pie I sold was building something bigger than survival. By the time Noah was 6 months old, I had more orders than I could handle from my tiny kitchen. And that's when an opportunity walked into my life that changed everything. The opportunity came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I had just finished frosting 3 dozen cupcakes when a woman in a tailored navy suit knocked on my apartment door. She introduced herself as Mrs. Harper, owner of a small cafe downtown. She had tasted one of my apple pies at a church event and wanted to know if I could supply desserts for her shop twice a week. Twice a week felt impossible. My kitchen was barely big enough for 1 oven tray at a time. But impossible had become a word I no longer feared. I can do it, I said before doubt had a chance to interrupt me. That one decision changed the direction of my life. I rearranged the apartment so the living room became a baking station. I bought a second-hand mixer. I worked while Noah napped, while he played, while he cried through teething. Some days I mixed batter with one hand and held him with the other. The cafe orders grew. Customers began asking, "Who makes these?" Mrs. Harper started writing my name on a small chalkboard near the register, "Homemade by Emma." Seeing my name there did something to me. For the first time since the hospital room, I felt seen for something other than being abandoned. Money slowly became less frightening. Not abundant, but steady. I opened a small savings account in Noah's name. Every extra dollar went there. I wanted him to have choices I never had. Meanwhile, news about Thomas filtered back to me through town gossip. He and the doctor had moved to another state. Supposedly, they were opening a private practice together. Supposedly, they were very happy. Supposedly. I stopped asking questions. Noah grew into a curious toddler with bright eyes and a laugh that could melt the hardest day. He never asked about his father at first. To him, our little apartment was the whole world. And I made sure that world felt safe. When he turned 3, I was able to rent a small commercial kitchen space behind the cafe. It wasn't glamorous. It had cracked tile floors and fluorescent lighting that buzzed overhead. But it was mine. I painted the walls myself on weekends while Noah helped with a tiny roller that mostly left paint on the floor. I named the business Sweet Grace Bakery. The day we hung the sign, I cried. Not because I was sad. Because I realized I had survived the worst moment of my life and built something steady out of it. But life has a strange way of circling back. One afternoon, almost 4 years after he disappeared, I received a letter with a return address I hadn't seen in a long time. And what it said made my hands go cold all over again. The envelope was thin, but it felt heavy in my hands. I hadn't seen Thomas's handwriting in almost 4 years. For a second, I considered throwing it away unopened. I had worked too hard to study my life. I didn't want the past walking back in. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I opened it slowly at the counter of Sweet Grace Bakery while Noah colored at a small table near the window. Emma, things didn't turn out the way I expected. We're coming back to town for a while. I'd like to see Noah. Maybe we can talk. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just maybe we can talk. My chest tightened, not with love, not even with anger. With something more complicated. I had spent years rebuilding my confidence brick by brick. I wasn't the bleeding girl in a hospital bed anymore. I was a business owner, a mother, a woman who had survived. Still, the idea of him seeing Noah unsettled me. Noah was 4 now. He had started asking small questions. Other kids have dads at school. Where's mine? I always answered honestly but gently. Your dad made choices that took him far away. But you are deeply loved. I never poisoned his heart with bitterness. That was a burden I refused to pass down. 3 weeks later, Thomas walked into my bakery. He looked older. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The confidence he once carried like a tailored jacket seemed worn thin. He stood near the door as if unsure whether he was welcome. Noah was in the back room with Mrs. Harper's niece, playing with toy trucks. Thomas cleared his throat. You've done well, he said, glancing around at the display case filled with pies and cinnamon rolls. I had to, I replied calmly. He asked to see Noah. I hesitated, then nodded. Not for him. For my son. I called Noah's name, and he came running out with flour on his shirt and joy on his face. Thomas knelt down awkwardly. Hi, buddy. Noah studied him with open curiosity. Are you my dad? There it was. Simple. Direct. Honest. Thomas swallowed. Yes. Noah nodded slowly, like he was solving a puzzle. Okay. Children can be braver than adults. They talked for 15 minutes. About trucks. About dinosaurs. About how Noah liked chocolate frosting best. Thomas seemed overwhelmed by how real it all was. When Noah ran back to play, Thomas stood up, eyes glossy. I made mistakes, he said quietly. Yes, I answered. You did. But I could sense something deeper beneath his return. Something not yet said. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it. Thomas didn't come back to apologize. He came back because the dream had collapsed. A week after that first visit, he asked if we could talk somewhere private. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the bakery. I needed to hear the truth with my own ears. He looked thinner this time. Tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. It didn't work out, he said, staring into his cup. The practice failed. Patients left after rumors. She lost her license for a while. There were investigations. We burned through money fast. I listened without interrupting. We have a daughter, he continued. Her name is Lily. She's 3. The words settled heavily between us. Another child. Another innocent life tangled in adult choices. And you're back because? I asked softly. He hesitated. Because I need a second chance. I want to be in Noah's life. I want to do the right thing now. Now. That word echoed in my mind. Not when I was hemorrhaging in a hospital bed. Not when I was up at 3 a.m. baking pies to afford diapers. Not when Noah took his first steps and looked around for someone who wasn't there. Now. I won't stop you from knowing your son, I said carefully. But you don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to pretend you didn't walk away. He nodded, eyes lowered. I know. Over the next few months, he visited occasionally. Always supervised. Always careful. Noah enjoyed the attention, but I noticed something important. When Thomas left, Noah didn't cry. He didn't cling to the door. Because his foundation wasn't fragile. Then one afternoon, while closing up the bakery, I saw her again. She stood across the street, holding a little girl's hand. The doctor. The woman who once stood beside my hospital bed with perfect lipstick and a secret. Time had changed her too. No designer clothes. No polished glow. Just a tired mother trying to cross the street safely. Our eyes met. For a second, the past rushed back like a storm. But instead of rage, I felt something unexpected. Calm. Because I had built something they couldn't take. And as fate would have it, life wasn't finished teaching any of us lessons. I didn't expect her to approach me, but she did. A few days after I saw her across the street, she walked into Sweet Grace Bakery holding her daughter's hand. The little girl had soft curls and wide, curious eyes. She couldn't have known the history standing between us. Emma, she said quietly. Her voice no longer carried that polished confidence. It carried humility. I dismissed my assistant early and stepped out from behind the counter. We stood facing each other in the same town where everything had once fallen apart. I owe you an apology, she began. Not because things went wrong for us, but because what we did to you was wrong from the beginning. There were no excuses in her tone. No defensive explanations. Just truth. I studied her carefully. This wasn't the woman who exchanged secret glances with my husband. This was a mother who had learned that stolen happiness never stays secure. Her name is Lily, she said, gently guiding the little girl forward. She's Noah's half-sister. The word half used to sting. Now it simply described biology. Lily waved shyly. Hi. I bent down to her level and smiled. Hi, sweetheart. Children are never responsible for adult wreckage. That belief had anchored me for years, and I wasn't about to let it slip now. We talked quietly while Lily colored at a small table. She told me their relationship had fractured long before they returned to town. That Thomas had struggled with alcohol. That resentment grew where excitement once lived. That choices made in passion rarely survive reality. I see you, she said finally, looking around the bakery. You turned devastation into something beautiful. Her words didn't feel like flattery. They felt like recognition. Over time, Noah and Lily began to see each other occasionally. Carefully. Slowly. Two children navigating a complicated family tree without bitterness. I made sure of that. Years passed. The bakery expanded to 2 locations. Noah grew into a thoughtful, intelligent teenager who talked about becoming a pediatrician. I want to help kids feel safe, he once told me. Safe. That word meant everything. Thomas drifted in and out, never fully steady. Regret aged him faster than time. Then one winter morning, I received a call from Lily's mother. Thomas was in the hospital. Advanced liver disease. Not much time left. Noah was 17. He came into the kitchen holding his phone, eyes uncertain. Mom, I think I should see him. Every protective instinct in me stirred. But I remembered something important. Resentment is heavy. And I refuse to let my son carry it into adulthood. If that's what your heart says, I told him gently, then we'll go together. Because some chapters must be closed face to face. I couldn't believe my eyes as I stood at the entrance of the grand hall. The soft glow of chandeliers reflected off crystal glasses and polished floors. My grandson, the one who had betrayed me years ago, was laughing with friends, completely unaware that I had returned, not as the frail, dependent woman he expected, but as someone who knew the truth and had the power to expose it. I took a deep breath, feeling the years of anger, hurt, and disappointment simmer beneath the surface. This was my moment, not just for revenge, but for justice and closure. Walking slowly toward him, I noticed how oblivious he was, immersed in his celebration. The irony was sharp. He had tried to erase me from his life, thinking I would fade quietly into the shadows. But life has a way of giving back what we try to hide. I moved closer, making sure my presence was felt. Conversations paused as people turned, sensing a shift in energy. My grandson's smile faltered, confusion flashing in his eyes when he finally looked up. "I think it's time we had a little chat," I said, my voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of years of betrayal. The guests around us began whispering, curiosity and tension filling the room. My heart pounded, but I felt no fear, only empowerment. This was the moment I had envisioned countless times during sleepless nights in that nursing home. Every lie he had told, every manipulation, every act of greed, it all led to this confrontation. He tried to play it off, offering nervous laughter, but I wasn't here to be placated. I began recounting the truth, the nursing home he had sent me to, the house he sold without my knowledge, the power he had tried to wield over me. His face turned pale as the whispers grew louder. Friends and family who had once admired him now saw a different story, a story of deceit, selfishness, and cruelty. I could see the disbelief in their eyes, but also relief that the truth had finally come out. As I spoke, I noticed a change in him. The arrogance faded, replaced with guilt and panic. He stammered, tried to interrupt, but I had rehearsed every word in my mind for years. Every detail mattered, and I delivered it with clarity and strength. I wasn't just telling a story, I was reclaiming my dignity. I had survived his betrayal, and now everyone else would see the real person he was. By the time I finished, silence had fallen. Eyes were wide, some glistening with tears, others with shock. I took a step back, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Then, quietly, I smiled. Not out of malice, but because I had taken back control of my life. The room had changed forever. And as I left the hall that night, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I knew I had delivered the truth, exposed the lies, and finally, allowed myself to heal. For anyone who has ever been underestimated, betrayed, or silenced, remember this. Your voice matters, your story matters, and justice doesn't always come in expected ways, but it always comes when you stand strong and claim it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.